Discerning the Book of Revelation, the Seventh Seal, the Seven Trumpets, Part 8. Welcome back. I'm glad you're joining me again in this study. Our last study was packed, so let's review what we learned then. The vision that John saw of Jesus Christ with 144,000 individuals on Mount Zion appeared to be a vision of celebration as John heard a voice like of a harpist playing a harp. In this study, we will continue to find out what this vision means. Next, the 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel were the first offering for God and Jesus Christ, the remnant of the nation of Israel that even Paul wrote about in the epistle to the Romans. Next, presumably, these were also the faithful souls that John saw when the fifth seal was opened. Next, the preaching of the gospel comes before judgment. The gospel was preached all over Israel before the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Next, the gospel was first heard by the Jews before it spread to other nations and peoples. This was the order of salvation that God ordained. Next, the timeline of the last 70 years of Jerusalem began when John the Baptist and Jesus Christ were born in 6 BC to the death of Peter in 63 AD. The events in these last 70 years of Jerusalem fulfilled the prophecy in Daniel 9, verse 24. Now, we return to this vision that John saw of Jesus Christ and the 144,000 individuals on Mount Zion or Jerusalem. Along with that vision was the sound of the harpists playing their harps. So what do these mean? Well, I was hoping to answer this question in this segment, but because of time constraints, I am going to defer it for the next segment. I do not want to miss the messages from these two angels that we are going to examine today in this study. From our last study, John saw the first angel proclaiming the gospel and judgment. This time, John saw the second angel. Revelation 14, verse 8. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So let's examine what this cryptic message means from the second angel. We read the name Babylon in this verse, but do not mistake this for the literal Babylon in the Old Testament, where Nebuchadnezzar was a king. The name Babylon in this verse is certainly figurative for a great city. I suspect that the name Babylon was used by the angel because of idolatry. In Daniel 3 verses 1 to 7, Daniel narrated that Nebuchadnezzar set up a golden image with a measurement of 90 feet by 90 feet. Everyone was commanded to worship this image as soon as the music started to play. If you turn back to the pages of the Old Testament history, you will remember why God destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. In summary, after Solomon died, the nation split into two, and the northern kingdom, headed by Jeroboam, committed idolatry by worshipping the golden calf that was similar to the first idol that the children of Israel worshipped in the wilderness after God rescued them from Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The southern kingdom of Judah was left after God destroyed the northern kingdom in the hands of the Assyrians. The Lord God did not tolerate the idolatry of the northern kingdom, and it was judged to extinction. Do you think the southern kingdom of Judah would be exempted from God's judgment if they committed idolatry? So let's examine in depth verse 8 to understand what this cryptic message is from the angel. In Greek, the name Babylon is figurative for a type of tyranny, A tyranny means oppression, despotism, or cruelty. In Peter's first letter to the Christians in Asia Minor, Peter used Babylon as the location of the church where he was writing from. I believe he was writing from Jerusalem. He used the name Babylon as a way to describe the idolatry that was going on in Jerusalem. As well, the oppression the church was faced with against the religious people who wanted to eradicate Christianity. While there has been a dispute about this matter, as some say Peter was writing from Rome, there is a strong evidence based on the scriptures that the most likely place he was writing from was Jerusalem, because Peter's missionary activity was centered in Jerusalem. Remember, Peter was the one that established the first church in Jerusalem. You can read that in the book of Acts. As for the pronoun she, the allegory for Jerusalem in the Old Testament, specifically in Ezekiel 16, was always as an unfaithful bride and a harlot. I highly recommend that you read Ezekiel 16 to understand what the Lord thought of Jerusalem. The phrase, the wine of the wrath of her fornication, is certainly a figure of speech, meaning she is intoxicated by her passion for harlotry. In other words, she is unfaithful. The worship of other gods is equivalent to being unfaithful to God. As shown earlier, the northern kingdom was destroyed because of their practice of idolatry. In Revelation 17, verses 1 to 2, we read a similar description of a woman that made the inhabitants of the earth drunk with the wine of her fornication. And there came one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. We will explore these verses later on in another study. Revelation 14, verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. In our previous study, we studied the beast. The beast represents the rulers of the world that came out of the four kingdoms. During the Apostle John's era, the beast you're reading was the Roman Empire. The worship of the beast then was the worship of the Emperor of Rome. In our time or era, the beast is the worldly system that we live in. In general, we worship the beast when we do not obey Christ and God's word. The pronoun his in this verse can be ascribed to any male or person. In this verse, we also read of the mark in the forehead or in the hand. What do these mean? The emperors of Rome considered themselves as deities or gods. Emperor worship began with Augustus Caesar. He succeeded Julius Caesar. Augustus Caesar's name was Octavian, but he changed it to Augustus, meaning the exalted. While there were other forms of deities in the Roman Empire, the worship of the emperor was the state religion. Already in Jesus' time, the image of the emperors were on the face of the coins. In one instance, as narrated in the books of Mark and Matthew, the Jews were trying to trap Jesus about whether to pay taxes to Caesar or not. They wanted to make Jesus appear as fomenting or inciting rebellion against the emperor of Rome to get him in trouble. Mark 12, verses 16 and 17. And they brought it, and he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's, and they marveled at him. In verse 17, we can sense that Jesus Christ was separating the domain of Caesars and God. As such, Christ was telling them that money belongs to Caesar, so that they must give it to him. The image you're looking at are examples of Roman coins with the image of the emperors. This was the image of the beast. And here is an occasion that affirms the worship of emperor or the beast among the Jews. John 19, verses 14 and 15. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he, Pontius Pilate, said unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Please understand the seriousness of this text. This was coming from the lips of the priests who knew better. This was evident that the religious establishment in Jerusalem had no problem worshiping the beast who was the emperor. There has been an enormous misunderstanding about this verse, which leads to error about what the marks of the beast mean. The beast then was the Roman Empire, and it was represented by the Roman emperors. The beast today is the worldly or secular system that we live in. This secular system is represented by the governments in this world. The marks, which also mean symbols, are simply figurative for objects that represent this world. The mistake the mistakes that many people make about these verses is when we designate them to a literal meaning. As almost everything in the book of Revelation is figurative or allegorical, such as the mark in the forehead of the 144,000 individuals, the mark of the beast is no exception. There are two marks that are described here, one in the forehead and the other in the hand. As shown in the previous slide, they were trying to trap Jesus about paying taxes. What is the article of dispute about paying taxes even today in our culture? Is it not because we do not want to part with our money? And where does money come from? Is it not from the fruit of our labor or work, which is symbolically from our hand? Is it not that in this world we measure success by the accumulation of wealth? Then the mark on the forehead. This is symbolic of how we think. What do you think most? Just like the high priest, they rejected Christ because they think worldly or fleshy. They were looking for a Messiah that would free them from the yoke of Rome. Their ideal Messiah was the one that would regain the physical kingdom of Israel for them. It was all material or physical. So what do people worship today? Is it not wealth or money and fame or success? What do you think most in your day? What do you do most of the time? That becomes your God. In Matthew 6, Jesus Christ spoke these words. Matthew 6, verse 21. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Then in verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. In the New Testament scriptures, Jesus Christ made a dichotomy about what men worship. It is between God and money. This is the object of the mark of the beast, money. Money is the article of the mark of the beast as represented by our labor, which is the hand, or what we think most, which is in the forehead. Let's turn to the book of Ezekiel to see what God showed Ezekiel about the idolatry that was happening in Jerusalem. Now, mind you, this was around 593 BC that God showed Ezekiel this abomination. This was about 13 years before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Ezekiel 8, verses 5 and 6. Then God said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now toward the north. So I lifted up my eyes toward the north, and behold, north of the altar gate in the entrance was this image of jealousy. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they're doing? The great abominations that the house of Israel are committing here to drive me far from my sanctuary. But you will see greater abominations. Continuing on, Ezekiel 8, verses 7 and 12. And he brought me to the entrance of the court. And when I looked, behold, there was a hole in the wall. Then he said to me, Son of man, dig in the wall. So I dug in the wall, and behold, there was an entrance. And he said to me, Go in and see the vile abominations that they are committing here. So I went in and saw, and there, engraved on the wall all around, was every form of creeping things and loathsome beast, and all the idols of the house of Israel. And before them stood 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel, with Jezaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them. Each had his censer in his hand, and the smoke of the cloud of incense went up. Then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the dark, each in his room of pictures? Continuing on, Ezekiel 8, verse 14. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Ezekiel 8, 16 and 17. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, worshipping the sun toward the east. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations that they commit here, that they should fill the land with violence and provoke me still further to anger? Tacitus was a known Roman historian in the first century. He wrote about the golden vine that was discovered at the entrance to the sanctuary. Not many people knew about this part of history. The Jews would bring their gold as part of their pledge to the temple, and the priests would hang them on this vine. This golden vine was in the temple before Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. This is a direct quote from Tacitus. Their kings are not so flattered, the Roman emperors not so honored. Jews allowed no images of their rulers or of Roman emperors in their temple or city. However, their priests used to perform their chants to the flute and drums, crowned with ivy, and a golden vine was discovered in the temple. Look at the people worshiping in white. Who do you think these people were? The third angel spoke, and this will be the consequence. Revelation 14, verses 10 to 11. He also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. These worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Let's summarize the messages from the three angels that John saw. The first angel proclaimed and called for repentance and the coming judgment. The second angel announced the fall of Jerusalem. And the third angel warned against idolatry and the worship of the beast and his image. In our last study, I provide you this timeline of the last 70 years of Jerusalem that fulfilled the prophecy in Daniel 9, verse 24. According to this timeline, I am convinced that the messages of the three angels were proclaimed during this time. If you need more details about this timeline, you can find this in part 7 or in our last study. It was during this time that the gospel was preached in Israel, and judgment was declared by Jesus Christ in Matthew 23. And in Matthew 24, he prophesied about the fall of Jerusalem. This was during the same week he was crucified. So all these three messages from the angels were completed during the last 70 years, and then the last 7 years from 63 to 70 AD were the events that led to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. These events were related to the first and second trumpet sounds that we studied earlier on. I would like to remind us all that the nation of Israel violated the first and greatest commandment over and over again. And they did this with such impunity for nearly 1,500 years. Israel tested God and his forbearance. In Matthew 22, verse 37, Jesus Christ summarized the first four of the Ten Commandments written in Exodus 20. Matthew 22, verses 37 and 38. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. This means that nothing or no one goes before him, not in the form of carved image or any likeness whatsoever, or even use his name idly or pointlessly. And to love him means to keep the Lord's day holy for him. I pray that we will learn from the past, that we may be careful not to commit the same mistakes. Finally, to end this study, let us turn to the first letter of John, chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, to the Christians in the first century, and this applies for us too today. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes, and pride in possessions, is not from the Father, but is from the world. I would like to leave you with this thought. What you think most or what you do most, that is your God. May God's light shine upon you today in this very dark and evil world. This ends our study for this segment. If you have any question or feedback, you may send it to my email shown on the slide. This ministry is online at www.calltotruth.org. You may also find this revelation series on this website. May His light shine on you today, and hope to see you next time.